Welcome, everyone. I just want to give it another minute or two just to give other people a chance to join, and then we will start. Please be patient. Can someone please confirm that they hear me from the attendees? Great. Okay, everybody can hear me. All right, so let's get started. Hello and welcome everyone to today's webinar. I want to especially welcome all of our colleagues from Siegwerk, but also all our external attendees from all over the world. We are very, very pleased that you are joining us today. Today, our speakers will be discussing the potential of inks and coatings in a circular economy. So before we get started, I'm just going to go through some housekeeping to ensure you can interact with myself and with the speakers. So firstly, all attendees are automatically muted. If you wish to ask a question to the presenters, please type your question in the question box, not in the chat box. And at the end of the session, the presenters will answer as many as possible during the Q&A session. In the event that we experience any technical difficulties, please stay online and wait for instructions. A recording will be made available. I would now like to welcome our speakers for today, Alina Malm and Ralph Detsch, and I'm going to be handing over to Alina.
Great, thank you, Kala, and it's great to have you all online and on board for this journey. Today, we want to explore the true potential of inks and coatings in a circular economy because inks and coatings are so much more than color. What is essential is invisible to the eye. I think many of you know that quote from The Little Prince. And with that in mind, we want to welcome you once more to a journey to discover the hidden potentials. Your travel guides for today are myself, Alina Malm. I'm the head of the Circular Economy Hub. This is a department at Siegwerk especially introduced to drive the transformation towards the circular packaging industry internally as well as externally. And I would like to hand over to Ralph Detsch for quick introductions, who's my co-pilot today.
Yeah, yes, hello everybody, also from my side. Yeah, that's the first webinar we are going to launch now in the context of circular economy, and there will be more to come. So be patient about all the topics we want to discuss. So we wanted to give you today an insight and would like to explain to you that inks is definitely more than only a color, and how this can contribute to enable circular packaging solutions in the future.
Thank you, Ralph, and thank you for mentioning that today we really can only provide you with an overview, and then there are going to be many deep dives available throughout the year. So please understand this sort of as your first guided tour and make some marks on which points in the journey you would like to linger longer for the upcoming webinars and podcasts. So let's begin our journey. First
Alina,
stop, I want, yeah.
Some people can only see a blue screen at this point. So just make sure that you're...
Let me, what I'll do, I'll stop the presentation quickly and start from new. Stop and... Is it still only the blue screen?
Yeah, it's
yes.
blue.
Still only the blue screen. Now let me try a very quick fix. I'm sorry for this, but I guess that is the case when you do something for the first time. Sorry, give me 1 second. And I'll start the presentation or the sharing again. Let me know if you see a white screen with a little Siegwerk logo in the bottom.
Yes, we see it. Does
Oh,
everybody
okay.
else see it?
Okay.
Okay,
Let's
seems
go.
good.
Perfect. So getting the plane into the air is always one of the most challenging parts of any journey. I think that's fair enough. And luckily for all of you who haven't seen the slides so far, you didn't miss much because we're just about to embark on this journey. So as mentioned, the first stop today should be exploring the circular economy for packaging a little bit, just to make sure that we all have the same starting point. So the concept of a circular economy, in essence, combines economic development with the decoupling of the use of finite resources. This, in turn, should allow us as humans to prosper on this planet and do well while respecting the natural boundaries of our planet and hence not over-consuming beyond the limits of our planet. In order to put that into reality, sort of on a broader conceptual scheme, the circular economy thinks along 3 key principles. The first one is designing out waste and pollution. And this is much more than just mitigating waste and pollution. It's really thinking about how can we put product designs in place, process designs that avoid waste in the first place. The second principle, very important, is keeping materials in use. And this is also much more than just recycling, which at the end of the day is the last step of keeping materials in use. Think about other components such as reusing, repairing, or remanufacturing. The third principle is regenerate natural system. And here it's really about thinking about how can we give back to the planet in the speeds and extent that we take from it so that we stay within this balance. For the packaging industry, we roughly like to translate this concept into 3 key levers: reduce, reuse, and recycle. As Siegwerk, we think material agnostic, so we're not focused on one packaging material. So please keep that in mind when I go through the different steps quickly. So the first one, reduce. Here we can talk about eliminating packaging components that don't really serve a function that goes beyond protecting the packed goods. Food may be a difficult area for that, but think about a lot of the luxury goods or other fast-moving consumer goods where sort of the packaging is part of the product experience, but also nothing more than that. The other part in reducing is how can you eliminate the use of fossil-based materials. Here, of course, one of the major topics you will hear over and over and have heard in the past is how can you, for example, use more paper instead of plastic. But also we see sort of an increasing amount of other materials that are used that are renewable, from the more well-known things such as cornstarch, but to also sort of new rising material developments using seaweed or mushrooms, for example. Then moving to the second lever, reuse. Here it's really about how can you increase the utilization of a packaging once it's in the system. So think about reusing a package over and over for multiple purposes. There are many different options out there to do that, some using sort of digital shopping platforms that have great logistics designed into it, to the more, let's say, hands-on approaches of bringing your own packaging to the store when you do your shopping. And then the last stop in this is recycling. At the end of the life of a packaging, recycling is really the only viable end-of-life scenario, with maybe some exceptions for composting, but the chunk really has to go into a recycling stream. And here, two components are important. One is designing for the recycling infrastructure and the recycling streams we see today, but then also using the recycled material, again, ideally in comparable applications. So now that we're all on board on what a circular economy is roughly and what it means for a circular economy, I want to take us to the next stop in our journey. Inks and coatings and what meets your eye. So if we think about inks and coatings today, we think, of course, about branding and customer information and everything that is visible to our eye. We can also think about sort of haptic effects. How does it feel when we touch and use a packaging? But there is also, of course, the component of protection and food safety, which are immensely important and, of course, are part of the overall value proposition of a packaging. Now, this is visible, but what is invisible, especially what is invisible that helps a circular economy? So let's dive into this a bit deeper and discover what inks and coatings mean for circular packaging. Thinking about our three levers again, let's start with reducing. And here, just one example of how can we reduce the use of fossil-based materials by using paper that is functional and recyclable or compostable at the end of life. A few things come to mind here, and again, these are only examples, as this is sort of overview of everything. When we think about paper, we need a lot of functionality, especially when it comes to barriers. Paper doesn't have that naturally compared to plastics, for example. Here we talk about printed, recyclable barriers for water, aroma, grease and oil, but also mineral oil, which is on the agenda now for quite some time. Important is to understand that paper also goes into a recycling stream and also has to be de-inked. And here, ink formulations can really contribute to a high quality pulp at the end of the recycling process that then can be made to new paper applications. And lastly, in the converting process of paper packaging, hot and cold sealing solutions that can be enabled with inks and coatings are essential to really give the pack the full functionality we need. Moving to our next lever, reuse. Most of you might think, how can inks and coatings play a role for reuse models? Isn't that all sort of supply chain and brand owner driven and converter driven maybe? But here ultimately inks and coatings can have a huge positive impact in all these stages. For example, if you think about labels in sort of the typical German beer bottle, for example, these have to come off very easily in a reuse system without bleeding into the wash water. Also, if you take it a step further and think about for example, other packaging types, they have to be customized at sort of the last mile or very close to use again. And for each use cycle, you need different information on the pack. The brand, for example, might have to stay the same, but the best before date has to change for that use cycle. Here, primers for easy de-inking, but also inks for digital printing can really come in handy. And then, of course, especially in times like these, safety is on all our minds. And here, antimicrobial coatings can be part of future reuse schemes. Moving us to the next and probably one of the most discussed levers of a circular economy, that is recycling. And we'll focus here on plastic, but please bear in mind that this is evenly as important for the paper recycling stream. If we think about plastic, we think about flexible packaging and rigid packaging. For flexible packaging, here what we really focus on and what inks and coatings can really enable is the switch to monoplastics, meaning only having one type of plastic in the packaging, ideally PP or PE, which then makes the subsequent recycling much easier. Here, of course, to begin with, inks optimized for PO films are essential, but also sort of optimizing recipes for the mechanical recycling process that they will end up in, ultimately increasing the recyclate quality again. Also, what comes to mind here again are barrier coatings. With moving away from a certain pack design, we again lose a certain level of barrier that we have to reintroduce, and printed barrier coatings can be an option here. Also thinking about sort of the best future recycling process and, for example, deinking as part of a future mechanical recycling process, surface print solutions will become immensely important because they allow easy deinking. Then further, again, functionality of the pack is key, so hot and cold sealing solutions in your pack will be really essential. If we move to the rigid packaging side, here it's really about how can you create or keep the value of sort of the main container. And sort of one example I already mentioned, sort of in the area of reuse, which is equally as valid for a rigid plastic container, is labels that are easy to dissolve, easy to peel off in the recycling process, and do not bleed into the wash water. But also, if we think about sort of other forms of labeling rigid containers, for example, shrink sleeves, there is a lot of optimization we can do that either allows us to feed the shrink sleeve into the recycling stream or also to make it fit for the current recycling process. There's one topic that really covers flexibles as well as rigid plastic packaging, and that is deinking as part of the future recycling system, future mechanical recycling system. And here we offer deinking primers that make the deinking much easier in the process, and hence improve the overall likelihood of this process becoming reality, and of course, increasing the quality of the output material. Now, this was a lot of theory. So for the next stop in our journey, or let's better say next stops in our journey, I would like to quickly take you through one practical example of how inks and coatings really play a role here. So let's just have this tasty treat. It's little cookie bites covered in chocolate. So perfect for your afternoon coffee or tea. Today, if you would find a product like this in the shelf in the grocery store, usually it will be packed in a structure similar to what you see here. And this is absolutely not recyclable. The reason for that is that, first of all, we have three different kinds of plastics in there. We have the PP on the top layer, we have the metallized PET plus the PE as a base layer. And also the adhesive structure in there makes it nearly impossible to separate these different materials and feed them into the different recycling streams. So let's start the circular transformation. The first transformation that we'll do is move from this packaging design that includes three different types of packaging to three different types of plastic, to really only using one type of plastic, a PE in this case, while it still remains a laminate structure. Let me show you how this can happen. So first of all, we switch the top layer to an MOPE. The MOPE is optimized, so it's already an optimized film, and it's enhanced by certain performance characteristics. We can think about heat resistance for sealing, but also transparency and gloss. Why are the latter two important? Because we will remain within a reverse print, of course, optimized for this new type of film, and also optimized for the mechanical recycling process. Followed by a layer of adhesives. This is still in here to ultimately bond it to the back PE base layer that, among other, sort of creates the foundation for our hermetic seal. With these few switches and sort of really thinking about how can inks play a significant role in this switch, we've already created a more recyclable pack. And this is something where we have many development projects addressing just this transition, because case by case obviously is different, but it is doable and it is something we can all push ahead. Taking this a step further is moving from a laminate structure, so having 2 layers of film, to actually only having 1 layer of film and a surface print. Admittedly, in here, we still need a little bit of innovation, but I want to show you on what we can achieve if we work on it together. So here, we would start with heat and scratch resistant lacquer as sort of the outer layer, followed by a surface print, and sort of the main film is the MOPE. Looking at it from the other way, we basically have an MOPE pouch with a surface print where then heat and scratch resistant lacquers are added. Here in this setting, sort of a lot is demanded from the surface print, but also from the heat and scratch resistant lacquer. If you think about sort of the heat and scratch resistant lacquer, the name already almost gives it away. You want to protect the print, so you have to make sure that within handling in the supply chain, but also at home at the consumer, nothing happens to the appearance of the package. But also there's sort of this great functional perspective in here that you want to protect the PE, which is in the very outer layer, from the heat that is transmitted during the converting process, so that the PE doesn't melt too early or too late if it's not done adequately. So here we can really allow for spot on sealing of the pack. The surface print itself has to be optimized with regards to optics. So there's no MOPE over it anymore that can sort of create gloss, for example. But also sort of the bonding on the MOPE is a huge topic here that we can enable with the inks and coatings to match the film that you use. With this in mind, we would really have the most recyclable pouch out there that we can today design with only 1 plastic, a surface print. I want to point out here that there are a few tweaks we could do in addition from an inks and coatings perspective. Number 1, if you think about the barriers, for example, that I mentioned earlier. In the animation you just saw in the example, we assume that the barriers can be offered by the MOPE. However, that development or that film property cannot always be provided. So here a printed barrier coating, for example, for oxygen, can really come into play to create the barrier that we lost initially by taking out, for example, in the case of oxygen, the metallized PET. Also taking it a step further, what we could include here is the deinking and delamination primer, so that when it comes into a hot washing process, for example, for deinking in the mechanical recycling stream, the inks would actually dissolve, and in case we still have a laminate, the 2 PE films would separate first, so that then the inks can dissolve, really creating a very clear recyclate quality, which has high degree of different use cases. that is one topic, for example, we'll dive deeper into in another webinar with colleagues mid of February. After this longer stop in the circular packaging solutions and what we can make possible, I quickly want to sort of walk you down the grocery aisle or grocery store aisle, because ultimately all the innovation we put in leads to availability and hence really leads to making the circular packaging industry a reality. Just two quick examples that, depending where you live, you might find in stores today. One is where we transformed from plastic, in this case a PET/PE mix, to a paper packaging for the coffee sticks. You might know, really taking out plastic out of the stream and introducing a paper packaging that is fit for recycling for the paper stream. Another example here in the area of recyclable plastic, cat food or dry pet food in general, you can choose your animal, where we had a PET/PE mix, and again we transferred it to an MOPE laminate, so similar to the transition you just said. In both structures, we also took out PVC of the total ink composition, increasing the recyclability once more. So the final stop in our journey are your questions, which create our joint path to circular packaging. Thank you for paying attention, and I'm looking forward to the discussion to follow.
Thank you so much, Alina. So I just want to point this out to everybody. We have a lot of things in the pipeline, a lot of things to stay tuned for. So please keep checking our website. We've got the link up here. And also make sure that you are following our LinkedIn profile for updates. We have more podcasts coming. The next one is coming, as Alina said, in mid-February. So we will be posting that on LinkedIn, and you can register via that link. We also have a lot of videos coming up. So there's one currently out that we did with Business Reporter and Forbes. So you are very welcome to go check that out. That has a lot of information that's very, very useful and interesting. And we also have a video that explains our deinking process with our deinking solution in a little bit more detail. And then there are a lot of publications you can read. So for example, we have our white paper, and we have a number of other publications listed here that you could go check out. But for now, let us go to the questions. So we have a couple of these. So the
and
first...
Carla, if it's okay, I'll stop sharing my screen. Then we have the faces for. Bear with me if there's another technical hiccup when it comes to stop sharing. It should work.
Technical hiccups, no matter what. All right. So we have one question about the recyclable barrier coating. Someone's asking whether that product is available on the markets at the moment.
Ralph, could you jump in while I fix my technology in the background?
No, I was on mute. So I did the classical mistake. The most happening mistake in these times. So I was on mute. So okay, barrier coatings. Yes, that's one of the key elements. If you move from, let's say, multi-layer materials to monolayer materials, you quite often lose barrier functionalities. If you move from plastic to paper, you lose also a lot of barrier functionalities. And so there is a need for providing barrier. And there are products available, for instance, also in the paper area, when it comes to grease barriers, moisture barriers. Yeah, also in the plastic area, you find offerings in the context of oxygen barrier, for instance. Yeah, there is still a lot in development, I have to say. Yeah, so if you ask me, is this already available, fully tested, industrialized, and so on? There, the clear answer is no. There's still to come, but it's really something which will come and which will contribute a lot to make circular packagings happening, because this is one of the key elements. I would also say in this context, as barrier functionalities like oxygen barrier is pretty much about shelf life. Yeah, I would also expect that there is a revisit of needed shelf lives, which will come up also in the market, because we are living in a, let's say, history or an experience where you can easily put multi-materials together, and then you achieve a certain barrier functionality. Therefore, there will also be learnings coming up. What is really the needed barrier functionality? What is the needed shelf life for the future?
Okay, great. And then next question, how to enhance the adhesion strength of ink surfaces printed on MOPE?
Okay. Yes, MOPE. I think we are not talking easily about MOPE. If I go back a few years, then MOPE was not so much in discussion, or maybe even not existing. Yeah, so that is one of the new trends and developments, that we find many more oriented materials. And whenever you come up with or let's say with new materials, then of course you have to watch out also the technical properties. Adhesion is one of them. I think as we are talking about polyolefinic surfaces, you have the classical approaches of the typical surface treatments. Yeah, for instance, like a corona treatment on the surface, which is important to let's say enable the surface to provide good adhesion for inks and coatings. But there's also then maybe things to optimize from the ink point of view. Yeah, so the typical way is have a look at the specific material, and not every material is the same. And then you have to check out what is needed in order to provide the needed adhesion. And like Alina also described, adhesion is not just making it sticking forever. Yeah, there might also be then good reasons that you design the whole print structure in a way that you can intentionally take off the ink again when it comes, for instance, for the inking and separating the ink from the material to optimize the recyclate quality. Yeah, so it means also a task for an ink supplier is not only make it sticking hard, but also providing maybe the functionality to take it off in the moment when you want to take it off. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great, thank you. Next question, would a de-inking process work if no primer was applied?
Yeah, so the inking process today, there is in let's say in industrial context, you will not find the inking in plastic implemented. Yeah, for paper, this is a well-known process implemented for many years. There are still maybe things to optimize, but for plastic, this is pretty new. And therefore, you have to look which kind of material combinations you're looking at. Yeah, so it means you will get a certain level of de-inking of most of the structures just with a, let's say, with a broad working de-inking approach. But if you want to optimize it, and if you want to strive really for the maximum quality you can achieve, that means the maximum separation of the ink, then you have to look into maybe supporting the inking process with appropriate inking primers or adaptations of the printed ink system to the specific surface. Yeah. What is important in this context, if you take the, let's say, the full range of plastic waste, what we have out there, you can of course think about, do we approach this problem just on the complete mix? Yeah, take for instance here in Germany, in Europe, you have these yellow bags or blue bags, and in different countries, different colors from bags, but you would just apply everything to everything. Yeah, it is quite a rough and bold method, which might give some improvement, but maybe not the maximum what you can achieve. And here the whole area of sorting and separation kicks in. So it's very important also in the context of the inking to think about of sorting the material as much as possible so that you have clean material streams in terms of the material composition. And then of course the inking, as it can be designed explicitly for the specific material streams, can be much more effective.
Ralph, can I maybe add on to that, because I like sort of the way some of our colleagues sometimes put that, to say, in theory, you can sort of de-ink anything. You just have to leave it in there long enough and put the right chemicals in it. But for sort of a de-inking as part of the mechanical recycling stream, it has to be economically viable. And how do you achieve that? That is by low times in sort of the wash water, the inking process step, and also, of course, sort of other process components, for example, temperature. And here is where sort of the ink formulation really comes into play again. And we've just noticed that sort of primers are really key to optimizing sort of the speed and temperature fit for the process, and ultimately making it viable.
Yeah, and you will see much more in the announced session in mid of February. So
yeah, we don't want to take away the thunder.
The deep dive of the inking, yeah.
Okay, next question. What do you consider a barrier, and what are the best OTR and WVTR values?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, so and I think I will not go into details of the technical numbers, but let me answer the following. Of course, we are coming here from the as-is situation, yeah, where you have a given barrier functionality of a packaging structure, and this is in the first place, of course, the natural, I would say, the natural benchmark what is out there. That you say, okay, I have a structure, for instance, you have I don't know, a paper PE laminate, which is very common in many applications, and now you take off the polyethylene, and then you say, okay, do we have a barrier coating with just doing exactly the same job like the polyethylene? Yeah. So if you look at this, of course, depending on the material combinations, the bar is very high. And therefore, as I said, you have to look into what is a relevant, significant, let's say, barrier which provides the needed barrier functionality for the appropriate purpose, whether it's packaging of food or packaging also of non-food, where barrier properties might also play a role. Yeah, so that means that the natural reflex coming from the history, the industry, the brand owners, maybe converters, they say, okay, just make it the same. Yeah, and you see, maybe if you come to things like structures which includes aluminium, yeah, where aluminium is 100% barrier, then you can imagine to provide 100% barrier is maybe a target which at the end is not completely achievable with just a printed coating. Yeah, therefore we have to look into what is possible. But I can tell you that the barrier coatings, what are out there, the barrier coatings where you're working on, they are striving for achieving the suitable, let's say, levels, which you would also maybe apply or achieve if you think about structures in the oxygen barrier, for instance, like EVOH, combined materials, co-extruded materials. That's kind of the target level, so that we can, on eye level, have barrier functionalities which also are achievable via coatings.
And maybe just sort of one addition on the paper side, if you look at, for example, the paper cup, because you just mentioned the PE liner, Ralph, there is where we really have to sort of play on par with the PE liner, so that you can have hot drinks and cold drinks in your cup while it's still being recyclable or compostable. And this is something where we've been very successful. I think that's fair to say.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good
Great.
example.
Next question. Of all the customers you work with, do you see more work with recycle-ready structures versus compostable structures? And how does ink work with compostable structures?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, also good question. So these are two directions to look at, let's say, approach a problem. The by far biggest lever what we see out there and the most activities is in the recycling part. That is clearly visible. Let's say also, especially if you look in terms of transformation of materials from the old structures to new structures. Yeah, so you see many more movements, and I think for good reasons, from non-recyclable structures to recyclable structures. Yeah, you will also have activities in the direction of compostability, and there is also certain applications where this makes a lot of sense. Yeah, it's always, I think, if you compare this and if you look at compostability, it's important to think about the end of life scenario. What is happening at the end? Yeah, and then if you take, for instance, take a tea bag, yeah, or a coffee pad. These are good examples where intentionally the food stays in the packaging. Yeah, so it means you have a lot of organic waste intentionally staying in the packaging, and this kind of, so to say, waste you can only, so to say, refeed into the system if you're looking for composting. Yeah, because the other methodologies would be much more, let's say, complicated and much more effort. Yeah, so that means in applications where a lot of organic waste stays in the packaging, composting makes a lot of sense. But if you look into many other, I think that's the majority of the market, the staying within a material stream, staying within the material stream of recycling is much powerful. And there is also many more activities, I have to say. Yeah, so there's a lot of activities moving from multi-materials to monomaterials. And this is the intention, to bring it to first into a status of being able to recycle. This is of course not enough. It has also to happen that the recycling really takes place. And this of course is different in different regions, in different countries, how much is the development status of the recycling industry. But there's a lot of activities there, and I'm really very confident that this will be a big contribution to solve the whole problem of plastic waste and contribute to the circular packaging target, what we're looking for.
Can I also just add one thought quickly? Ralph knows that this is a topic of passion for myself. There's one more consideration if you weigh recyclability versus compostability, is if you compost a packaging, the material is ultimately gone. You can't use it again for new packaging, and you actually lose a lot of the value of the packaging. And at the same time, you also still have costs for composting. If you think about industrial composting, where you need infrastructure, and the only valuable product you have in the end to sell is the new hummus, new dirt, which of course has a much lower market value than sort of a goods recycled plastic. And I think in the question was also sort of how do inks play into compostability? Mm-hmm. And maybe just to answer that quickly is what we look at is that the inks and coatings don't interfere with the composting process. I don't think, and Ralph, please correct me, that we're anywhere close of having actual inks that are 100% compostable themselves. We look at sort of the whole packaging structure and make sure that they don't interfere with the composting process.
Yeah, that's completely right. So you have standard norms even describing how to evaluate compostability, and there of course you need also to consider the inks, and there are solutions available, as I said. But I think it's a very important point to see that this transformation, what is currently happening, that this also has to be considered under economic reasons, yeah? And not in the sense of, okay, do economic reason block let's say the transformation, but even the opposite, that let's say viable positive economic cases will drive this transformation. And therefore we have not only to look into the technical part but also the economical part, and how we see it. There is a clear positive also at the end business case for this whole transformation, which might still require some regulatory frameworks, but when we are all in the same kind of frameworks, there is a clear positive also business case for the future for this.
Great. Okay, next question. They keep coming in. Does surface print on monolayer material plastics require different ink formulations?
Yes, it does. So that would be the short answer. Yeah, I think just if you take a laminate, yeah, and compare it with a surface print, yeah, in a laminate, what is the key technical properties the ink has to provide? Of course, it has to have adhesion. Yeah, it has to provide, let's say, good bond strength to keep the laminate stable through all the life cycle, let's say, challenges what this laminate will see. And it is, of course, the ink is kind of protected between two layers of film. Yeah, and if you move now to surface print, then the ink is outside. So it means, in the first place, you have again the adhesion. You have not the need for providing, let's say, bond strength values for being in a laminate, but you have additional requirements regarding, for instance, mechanical stability, scratch resistance, rub resistance, and also especially the heat resistance. And then typically, most of the packagings are closed by a heat process. So heat sealing is one of the most common technologies to close a package. And therefore, then the whole printed structure on the outside must be able to cope with this heat sealing process. And this is very different to the lamination part. There might be some inks which you can partly use for both. Yeah, but at the end, I would say you have to revisit the structures for the surface, and then you have to look what kind of systems are the right one, the optimized one for a surface print solution.
Okay. Next question. For flexible paper packaging, we usually build up the barrier on the inner side of the packs. Will your barrier coating be designed for the outer side, or can they also be used inside the pack?
I think that's both possible, depending on the application you have to look into. No? So what kind of packaging type is, what is the filling good, is it food, is it non-food? Yeah, so this plays a role. At the end, for the functionality itself, you can look into both sides.
And can I maybe also add on that, where sort of the beauty comes into play when you combine inks and sort of more what's called traditional lacquers and LPVs and sort of the new barrier coatings for paper, is that in this whole mix you have all these puzzle pieces, and you really can find the optimal setting as compared to if you have sort of a predefined canvas, so to speak, that with limited flexibility.
Okay, great. Next question. Are there opportunities to reduce the net ink weight on the unflexible packaging to reduce the share of ink compared to the total pack weight to, for example, get to the 10% threshold for certification?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think reduction is the number one lever in circularity. Yeah? So what we have to always think first. Yeah? What can we do to reduce? Yeah, and reduction in terms of ink coating weight is also a driver for, let's say, an efficiency driver for many years. Yeah, so that means that there are two things come together. Yeah, at the end, the point is that you need, of course, inks and coatings to provide the functionalities which we were elaborating on. Yeah, of course, the activities making maybe the ink coverage smaller. Yeah, there are discussions in guidelines whether you have to reduce the ink, whether you have to also maybe to take lighter inks. I think these are let's say valid discussions. At the end, if you really look for a future system where we are striving for maximum quality of recyclate, I think the key element is think in modules, think in different components which can be separated. And therefore, we are also much behind this de-inking idea. Yeah, so that is not about can we kind of making it a little bit better by the ink. So let's say the ink in the recyclate, making it better. You can do something, and that's also something we are working on. We can contribute. But the biggest step in terms of quality gain you get if you separate the materials. It's the same story all about monomaterials. Think always along the idea of making material streams monomaterial streams, and then you have a good opportunity to recycle them. That's the way forward.
Okay, great. Next one, economically, does it make more sense for CPG industry to move to paper coated with relevant barrier, or with paper coated with relevant barrier coatings, as a lot of brands are currently doing, when possible, or to remain on monolayer plastic coatings?
I think if you're already on monolayer plastic coatings, which I now may interpret in terms of monomaterial, which might not fit to everything, but if you compare monomaterials and you compare to paper, then I think both are viable options to go for. Yeah. So and the question is, when do you go for paper and when do you go for plastic? Is to a large extent depending on the application. Yeah, I think you saw this application already in our presentation, for instance, of this secondary coffee packaging. Yeah, if you take this, there paper is a suitable option to go for. Yeah, but if you would now think about packing the coffee sticks itself, which are inside the secondary packaging, yeah, there is a much bigger challenge if you want to make this with paper. So it means the first place you have to understand what are the technical requirements, and this will sort out most of the questions. Can I go to paper or not? And if you can go for paper, how do you can you make it reality? Yeah. The other part, which is maybe also to be considered, is always think along the end of life scenario, or even think in circles. Then you even don't have an end of life scenario, then everything stays in the system and in the circle. And therefore I would also encourage all of us to think along these lines. It means there might be certain packaging types in certain regions more favorable than in other regions, depending on the available infrastructure of waste management, of recycling technologies. So I think we have to consider this. Yeah, and that will not everything at the same time in the same way all over the world.
Can I also sort of add another thought on that, because I think in the question there was also sort of reference to the economics of it. Paper, if you sort of just take the base price, comes at a slightly higher price than the film. Usually, of course, it depends on the details, but sort of as a rule of thumb. However, I always want to caution comparing sort of paper, especially when it's sustainably sourced, with a fossil-based material, plastic. I would rather therefore compare sort of paper that is either already recycled or sustainably sourced with recycled plastic. And then, because these are sort of the two circular raw material sources, if you want to say, and then the picture might change from the economic perspective, but maybe also from the feasibility perspective, because some recycled content may not be available yet in the quality that you need today. So just a fair warning to make fair comparisons with regards to sort of circular raw materials in that sense.
Okay, great. Thanks, Alina. Next question, how or what is the status of the development of water-based inks for flexible food packaging, and what is the impact on recyclability?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good question. Yeah, let's say that's the question already for many years on what is now water-based inks for flexibles, solvent-based inks for flexibles, knowing that today the majority is on solvent-based inks. Yeah, and but there is also the possibility to go for water-based inks. Yeah, I think there remains the typical challenges, how to apply, let's say, the appropriate performance in the printing, in the lines. Yeah, it's about drying, it's about printing speed. So, but there are many solutions out there where you can go for water-based inks. So that's a possibility. Regarding, let's say, recyclability between water-based inks printed on a plastic and a solvent-based inks printing on a plastic. In general, I would not see there much difference in terms of this is better than the other. It depends then really going into the detail, maybe what is exactly the recycling process, what are the conditions, what kind of, let's say, composition you have in the inks, and that does not mean it's water-based or solvent-based. It's more about the composition of the dry ink film, what is on the packaging material.
Okay, great. Next question. Can barrier coatings provide a barrier against MOSH or MOAH?
So this is addressing the mineral oil topic. Now, I think that's something where the industry is working on quite a while. For many years, we have this challenge from the mineral oils coming in on over the, let's say, the recycling of paper. Yeah, where a lot of recycled paper is coming from the publication industry today. So there's possibilities to improve whether you have achieved really let's say, 100% barrier against the mineral oils, that needs also to be tested and qualified on the specific packaging. You have also to see that the mineral oil transmission to maybe a food inside is a gas phase transition, and it's not, let's say, transition just by migration. So it's really something which goes through the gas phase, and therefore you have to look into really testing this to judge whether this is enough a barrier. In general, we would recommend that for food packagings, you should not use the recycled paper quality, which is typically available today in the market.
And this is actually a really good example for sort of the room of improvement, or the work still to be done when it comes to paper recycling, to really also ensure that the repulp material can be used in many applications, not quote unquote downcycled.
Yeah, that's a good point, because you have to see today most of the recycled paper is coming from the graphics industry. You know? So if you look today on paper packagings, they are mostly not recycled today. Yeah, and this has to change, and therefore there's also a task and a challenge for the industry to make this happen. Yeah, if you are thinking about transforming something from a packaging, maybe before plastic you go to paper, or to optimize paper packagings, then we have to keep in mind how can we make sure that this also goes into the recycling stream and does not stay in the stream where it's at the end only incinerated.
Okay, fantastic. And we are almost out of time, so I'm going to leave this at as the last question. And the question is, can you elaborate a little bit on the different approaches between Europe and the rest of the world? So what is the difference?
Yeah. Yeah. So I would say, first of all, we have looked into this very much in detail in a big project. So the whole story of circularity is a global story. So it's not kind, okay, this is happening in Europe or maybe in US and so on. Yeah, it's really a global thing. And you all know also that, let's say, the waste problem is a global, yeah, and it's also not equally distributed over the world, but at the end we are talking about a global economy, yeah, and that means we are all in the same boat, yeah, literally we are on the same planet, and therefore it's a global topic. And this is also what we see. So there's hardly, I would say, there is no region, there's no country where circular economy is not really on the top lines of the agenda. If you now ask me what is about progress and where there's a lot of activities, then there are quite differences between the regions. Yeah, you have regions like Europe where you see a lot of regulations which have been implemented or have been coming up. You see a lot of associations work. There are other regions where you see less of this, but they have maybe a stronger, let's say, visibility and pressure, maybe from the market, from the brand owners. So there is differences in terms of how much you see on the political agenda, how much you see on the association and initiative agenda. But everybody is aware, and this is something which I would also like to remind all of us, don't think only while you read the news that the majority of the ocean ring happens in Southeast Asia, India, and China, that this is a topic far away from Europe or the US. It is not. Yeah, so we are in a global economy, and it's also our responsibility at the end to take care of all of this. And we are all depending also on the economies of the other regions and the countries. So this is something which is very important. And I expect that there will be more regulations coming up. And I can also say also industries are actively asking for regulations, which maybe in the first place you might be surprised, but at the end it's about that we have workable market conditions for the whole industry to make it a viable business where also, let's say, market mechanisms and competition in a healthy way can happen. And therefore we need regulatory frameworks which enable us to do our business successfully.
And maybe just to add on the regulation part and sort of how we're all connected globally is if you look back 10 years, we had 5 extended producer responsibilities schemes in place. Today, we have roughly 60 regions, cities, countries that have implemented it or are discussing implementation. And there's also sort of a dynamic happening. We have a single-use plastic directive in Europe, and we see them now coming up in India, in China, and they all look very much the same. So we're all very connected on a global scale, and whenever one starts, there will be some followers, luckily. So it's on all of us to get started.
Great. I think that's a really good note to end it on. So thank you so much for joining us, and please keep an eye out for our next webinars. We look forward to welcoming you to those, and have a great day. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you so much. Take good care. Bye.
Okay, bye. Take care.